Welcome back here with us on Urban Debate on Mirror Now. It is day 5 of war between Russia and Ukraine, and first time since the invasion, negotiators of Moscow and Kyiv have come together to hold talks on the Belarusian border near the Chernobyl exclusion zone. The world is watching the development very, very closely, but hopes aren't too high. Ahead of talks, Ukraine said it wants a ceasefire and withdrawal of Russian forces. However, according to some reports, Russia is seeking an agreement. However, ahead of the talks, the Kremlin said it would not declare its official position. Russia has announced it is banning flights from airlines in 36 countries, including the UK, Germany, Spain, Italy, as well as Canada. United Nations Security Council's rare emergency meeting is underway. It is a special session of the General Assembly called to discuss the situation between Russia and Ukraine. India, of course, is keeping a close eye on the situation, especially when it comes to evacuating Indians stranded in Ukraine. More flights have been arranged for the rescue mission. 4 union ministers will be visiting Ukraine's neighboring countries to personally oversee the evacuation process. We have been constantly speaking to students stranded in Ukraine, and here's what they have to say. Okay, we'll get you that update in just a bit. Throughout the day, in fact, we've been speaking to students, Indians who are stranded there in Ukraine and who want to come back. They say that the situation is a little difficult for them. A lot of people do not even have basic essentials that are required for the next few days, and hence they want to be rescued as soon as possible. And as we speak, we are also getting the information of a high-level meeting, another high-level meeting that Prime Minister Modi is chairing on the Ukraine-Russia crisis. The meeting is going on as we speak. That's the update that we have at this point in time. We'll be going across to my colleague Mohit, joining us on the phone line for more on this. Mohit, good evening. What is the latest you can share with us as far as this another high-level meeting is concerned?
We know for a fact that how the Indian government is constantly monitoring the situation in Ukraine, because we have our people stuck over there, we have our citizens stuck over there, and we have seen that how various distress calls are coming in from the students who are stuck over there. And as of now, the priority of the government is to make sure that all these people are taken out from Ukraine safely, and that is why 4 ministers will be sent to 4 different countries which have borders with Ukraine, and they will be coordinating with the local people over there, the local embassy and the local government over there, so that the students who come to these borders, they will be safely evacuated to India. Now, all of this was discussed in this particular meeting, which was being chaired by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and we know for a fact that how the Prime Minister in this meeting was briefed by Harshvardhan Singla, Foreign Secretary, and S. Jaishankar, the Foreign Affairs Minister. Now, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi has made it clear in this particular meeting that the evacuation of Indians from war-hit country is a top priority, and we know that India has also announced the sending humanitarian aid and medicines to Ukraine on Ukrainian government's request. So all these things and developments were being discussed, basically.
Right. All right. Thank you very much for the moment for joining us with all of those details, Mohit. In fact, let's now listen in to what the Indian students who are stranded in Ukraine have to say.
We have no source to go out. All the planes have been shut. There are no ways of transportation here. We have been stuck here since 1 week, and we just got some food left over, and presently there is no communication about what is going to happen next.
3 दिन से आए हुए हैं। 3 दिन से इंडियन एम्बेसी ने बोला हम आपको निकालेंगे। हर 5 मिनट में यहाँ पर एक बॉम्ब ब्लास्ट हो रहा है। कल पूरी रात की में बॉम्ब ब्लास्ट हुए, अभी भी बॉम्ब ब्लास्ट हो रहे हैं। अब इंडियन एम्बेसी को बोल रहे हैं कोई बात तक करने को आने के लिए तैयार नहीं है। ये लोग जो भी आ रहे हैं बोल रहे हैं अपनी रिस्क पे निकल जाओ। बाहर ऐसी सिचुएशन बिल्कुल भी नहीं है कि 5 मिनट में आप लोग खड़े रहो। खाना दे रहे हैं ये लोग 10 लोगों के बीच में एक प्लेट।
We have almost 4 bunkers with almost 1,500 students are being stuck. The biggest problem right now we are facing for evacuation, the travel to the west. The travel to the west is being almost 18 hours from here, and travel to the west we are not available with any kind of buses.
हम लोग कोई हेल्प नहीं मिल रहा है हमको to be rescued.
With food but without water and without any kind of facilities. We stayed whole of the night in cold of -3 degrees Celsius without any blankets, without any kind of accessory requirements. Everything got freezed, even our toes also got freezed.
Whenever we are trying to go to the borders by ourselves, we can't actually reach there because our road transport is not at all possible because the bridges are broken down.
यहाँ पे 3 दिन से बंकर में है. हम लोग जब भी बाहर आते हैं कुछ ना कुछ बॉम्ब ब्लास्ट वगैरह हो जाता है, हमें वापस जाना पड़ता है. इट वॉज रियली वेरी स्केरी.
So this is what the Indian students have to say who are stranded there, but the focus is now on the meeting that's going on between Russia and Ukraine. What can be expected from these meetings and how should we see the current situation? Let's understand from our guest joining us on the broadcast this evening, Colonel S. Tinney, retired, who's a defense expert, joining us on the broadcast today. John Harrison, Homeland Security expert, also live with us. J.K. Tripathi, former ambassador, is with us. And we are joined by Maruf Raza, Group Consulting Editor, Times Network. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us here on Urban Debate on Mirror Now. Colonel Tinney, I want to begin the discussion with you. Now the world is watching very, very carefully what is going to happen in the first round of talks that are taking place between Russia and Ukraine. But hopes aren't too really high. Why?
Why you are absolutely right that the hopes are not too high. And the reason is that, all said and done, this particular peace talks after day 5 of the operations, after 5 days of operation. And we must understand that for Ukraine, any kind of peace talk is acceptable because they are the people who are defending their territory and they are the people who are suffering the most. So whether it's the 3rd day, 5th day, 7th day, they will be happy for peace talks. As far as Russia is concerned, why Russia has agreed for these peace talks, we can analyze it into about 4 to 5 quick points. First of all, let's, why they've agreed is that probably Vladimir Putin feels that he's achieved all the military objectives or all the political objectives which he had set for, and now let's talk, which is not true. He's not achieved that. The second is that, okay, fine, I'm not achieving it, my military objectives and the political objectives, but let me give peace a chance, which also, knowing his own personality and the way he has unleashed the armed forces into Ukraine, doesn't look like. The third is that there is a growing global opinion against Russia ever since they have invaded inside Ukraine, and to sort of nullify that global opinion into some extent, this is a good means of showing that, okay, we want peace. Fourth, and the most important thing which I feel could be the reason is that Vladimir Putin, the way he anticipated the operations would pan out, it is not happening the way it is the way he probably would want to. So therefore, some time in between to readjust his plans, to readjust his troops, to get the logistics in order, so that again he can launch another round of attacks into Kyiv, Kharkiv, and all those cities which are still not, he doesn't have the control. So this is just a time delay in the entire, gambit of his operations, so that he's buying more time with this kind of peace talks is what I feel is the most likely thing. So very little is
okay. Interesting views you've given, Colonel Tinney. Dr. John Harrison, is Vladimir Putin actually giving peace a chance or trying to buy some time?
With the Colonel on this, that Putin has miscalculated the reaction. I think the military operations are taking longer than he anticipated, and he's got to try to head off some of the political and economic implications that he's facing. And this is the best way. This is the best way to do that. He's also got the Ukrainians who, again, they also need to be able to show that they are trying to do everything possible to end this conflict. So right now there's a moment in which, and he's very good at exploiting moments, and this moment is available for him. I wouldn't expect anything to come of it, but certainly he can then go back and he can, to his own population, more likely to whatever oligarchs are right now afraid of what's the international outrage that is mounting against Russia are going to say, that he's given every possibility to end this conflict, and it's the Ukrainians' fault, as he would say, if it continues.
Okay. Maruf, what are the defense objectives, in your opinion, that Putin had in mind? How many of them have been achieved? And how do you see Putin agreeing to actually come on this table for talks with Ukraine after the invasion, 5 days after the invasion?
See, normally when the military operations are launched, there are a set of aims and there are certain aims plus. So what they were aiming for, they've certainly, the Russians have not reached anywhere near aim plus. What they were aiming for was quick blitzkrieg through Ukraine and control of the territories so that they could thumb their nose at the NATO and basically say that, listen, we said we wanted a Ukraine be favorably controlled.
Okay. I think there's some problem with the connection out there. We'll try and reconnect with Maruf in just a bit. But Ambassador J.K. Tripathi, if I come to you with that question, so it's not peace move by Putin, but it seems more like an image correction when the world has gone against Russia?
It is partially the image correction and partially the move or intention to buy some time. In the name of negotiation while trying with full force or bigger force to capture Kiev. So that is probably the aim Putin has, and in that he is partially getting successful. And as regards the miscalculation of Putin of the Ukrainian resistance, as Ambassador Harrison said, I would like to say that not only Putin, but all the three parties, I mean NATO, Ukraine, and Russia, they miscalculated each other. NATO miscalculated that probably by putting sanctions, severe sanctions on Russia, Russia is going to bend down the knee, which didn't happen. Putin miscalculated that he never thought that he will get such a tough resistance from Ukrainian forces. And Ukrainian president miscalculated on the promises of NATO forces of arms and ammunition and military assistance. It is just like they gave false promises, empty and hollow promises, and they say almost sacrificed Ukraine. They should have earlier thought over it, but now it is a little bit too late. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Now, Dr. Harrison, so in a way, you believe that this is more of, the image correction that we are seeing. So then we can't really expect anything from the talks that are currently underway?
That is correct. I would think this is just buying time for the Russians. Again, the Ukrainians are in a slightly different position where they're going to try to do everything they can to reestablish some sort of peace or something else. But what the Russians, I think, where they miscalculated, as one of your earlier guests was saying, is that the international reaction, the public reaction, I think, has been probably much broader than they thought. They anticipated sanctions, and they anticipated probably smart sanctions. They also anticipated, I'm sure, that there would be some NATO backing, though they may have miscalculated the extent of it. But I don't think the Ukrainians really miscalculated much here. If they thought that NATO was going to come to their rescue, they were misreading every single public sign that was being offered. But certainly the international community, I think, has come much further than many people thought. But that still doesn't mean that Russian diplomacy is going to do anything other than buy time for facts on the ground to change, and that there'd be some military advantage that the Russians would be able to get. The Ukrainian military appears, though it's very difficult to get any reliable information out from the conflict zones, it does appear that the Ukraine has been able to at least slow up what the Russians probably thought was going to be a very quick advance. And just one other quick thing. What I think the international community should be quite surprised at is that the Russians have mishandled the cyber and the public reaction to this. They have been very good in the past about doing sort of the ancillary issues around modern warfare. And they have not been able to do this as effectively as they have in the past. And I think that's something that bears watching as to whether they are able to readjust or they have just lost their touch for a while, and it's unclear as to why that is the case.
Okay. Okay, we've got Maruf back on the debate. Maruf, you were telling us about, the objective, in your opinion, that Putin had and how much of it has been fulfilled, that he agreed to come on the discussion table.
No, it's not just because the objective hasn't been fulfilled that he's come to the discussion table. You see, when conflicts are happening, let's go back to the 1971 Indian operations in East Pakistan, now Bangladesh. Talks began to contain the operations from around 9th of December, and it was almost a week later that the surrender at Dhaka took place. So in conflicts, there is always room for talks, and either side exploits that to gain some advantage. Ukraine has been projecting a maximalist position that we want all of Russians out. That's not going to be possible. When you go in for such an adventure that Mr. Putin has gone in for, he is going to try and take away with him certain advantages. One of them is, to my mind, his minimalist, I think, expectations from the conflict would be that the area east of Ukraine, which is divided about 60-40 by a river running through Ukraine, which is the Dnieper River, should be under Russian control directly or indirectly. So he would like to achieve that, and believe me that they have planned for a 2-week operation. Just because they're meeting today doesn't mean it's going to be ceasefire tomorrow. Imagine India and China are still talking to each other after 2 years of engagement on the LAC, which was nothing as fierce as this. And 14 rounds of talks have really not given us what we are minimalist asking for from the Chinese. So please understand that Mr. Putin is in a far more aggressive mode. The second thing is, his intention was to show, apart from land grab, that NATO is hollow, is not going to come in support of countries that it promises to stand up for. All these accolades and all these statements are not any good. Supplying of weapons, money, etc. is not any good. You need more boots on the ground of trained soldiers. That's not happening. Ukraine has mustered a lot of its citizens to fight, and they're putting a damn good show. And that is what has got Russia to also step back and look at how they can now change the course of the operations. You see, the Russian military is very heavily armed, and they've not put in place the entire 100% of resources that they can put to play out here. I'm sure they'll increase force levels. I'm sure they're going to revisit their tactics. And if pushed to the wall, they will do what they did in Georgia and Chechnya, which means that ask civilians to leave built-up areas and then go hammer and tongs. And that could be either total victory for Russia in the cities, or at least a prolonged biting in built-up areas, what we in the military call FIBUA. That means it's going to be a long, messy affair, like the US and others got involved in Iraq and Afghanistan. In fact, the US and their friends want Russia to get involved in fighting in built-up area, and Russia knows what they want. So I think they're going to avoid it. But Ukraine and Kyiv in particular might go in for a long period of siege.
Okay, you expect it to be a long, messy affair. Dr. Harrison, coming back to you once again, then I'll go across to Colonel Dinny as well. Let's talk about the role of the UN in a situation like this. Do you think UN is on test? How can it really leverage its power as a global crisis mitigator?
Well, frankly, the UN has no power. The Security Council, as you're well aware, I'm sure, is the only body that has any legal authority in this, and it's stymied because one of the permanent five is involved. Going to the General Assembly is a political act to try to gauge where the international community is, but it has nothing other than moral authority, whatever that happens to be. So in reality, this is not something that unfortunately peacemakers are going to be able to do much about at the moment. It is going to be something that has to be fought out on the ground to whatever degree is left by both sides. Certainly the Ukrainians will try to push, and I think they have a much better legal and moral case, certainly, to get the Russians completely out of the Ukraine, and whatever political deal could have been reached perhaps prior to the invasion, that doesn't exist anymore. Whether the Russians want it or the Ukrainians want it, that doesn't matter. It's going to have to be probably a military victory of some sort. There'll be political consequences for that, clearly. And any military campaign is about political objectives. And right now, the Russians' political objective seems to have not been derailed. It's the military time frame that has been derailed, perhaps.
Okay. Okay. Maruf, do you see this as the worst diplomatic dilemma for a country like India?
Yeah, well,
The
that's
way
a very
it
good question.
abstained at the UNSC?
Well, that's a very good question, and there's doing a lot of rounds in India. There's a lot being written and spoken about it. But, you know, there are 2-3 things we need to understand about India's position, which remains non-committal. The reason is historically we've taken that stand. Secondly, if there is a lobby in Delhi which is pushing that India should go with the democracies, and that is United States. There are a lot of people, including me, who are questioning the merits of that idea. The reason is not that we approve of what Russia is doing, because if formally we come out in approval of that, tomorrow it will put in question the Chinese intrusions in India, and how can we make a case about expansionism there when we are approving expansionism by Russia. But our challenge is twofold. One is, how do you continue to keep Russia on your side, as well as get your weapons platforms from Russia, and 50 to 60% of our major weapons platforms still come from them. Secondly, Russia has always stood by us in crucial moments internationally. Ukraine has actually voted against India on many areas, including after our nuclear test. And many of these other countries have always been lecturing us about how we should get our act together internally. Russia doesn't lecture us. So those are sensitivities that New Delhi is also aware of and is considering. And finally, even not taking a decision after so much of toing and froing is a decision in itself. Because if you take a decision, then you rule out the other option. But those who believe that India being in the middle path, and it's a tough middle path to follow, but we've always done that. Those who believe that India being on the middle path could look to be a mediator. Sorry, that's a no-no, because we are allergic to mediation. Back to you.
Okay. Colonel Dinny, can India really remain non-committal for a very, very long time? What diplomatic muscle, in your opinion, India can deploy to diffuse the crisis? Or you think focus should be first on getting Indians out of the war zone and then see what needs to be done?
As far as the diplomatic skills is concerned, I think Ambassador Tripathi is here. He will be able to answer that in a better manner. But what your point is very right, that our first priority right now is to get our citizens back, and that is why at this moment at least, it is very important that we don't seem to be taking any sides, so that the safety and the welfare of our citizens is of paramount importance, and that I think everybody understands. I think even the Ukrainian or the Russians, they understand that India is looking after its own interest. But a quick word on what Maruf sir also was trying to mention is that India has always looked after its own national interests first, and I think there is a continuum of foreign policy as far as this particular stance is concerned. I think we have maintained it consistently, and that is why that consistency is what is our saving grace today. Today nobody says that why did you do it today this time. We have always been consistent with regards to our policy, whether it is with the US, whether it is the Russians or the other. But my only issue now is that with as this war progresses and as the war gets violent in the fighting which is going to happen in the streets of Kyiv or Kharkiv, and the moment those violence level rises and the casualties start increasing, how long can you take a neutral position is my question. That time the diplomacy will really be under test. As of now, it is okay, we have been able to, but when the body counts are going to rise, when if Russia gets frustrated to find a result, if they're going to use kinetic force disproportionate to what is required to be done, then I think it will be very difficult for India to justify its position.
Okay, Ambassador Tripathi. Now, the situation is quite tricky for India. The tricky diplomatic high table sort of a situation for India, because here we have a traditional friend who has turned an aggressor. So, what will be your suggestion? What can be the diplomatic correct way out for India in the current circumstances?
Look, my suggestion is that the stand that we have taken, we should stick to it, even now, because that is a time-tested stand. In past, we had that stand during the Cold War period, but it worked and it worked well for us. We got whatever we wanted from both sides of the Cold War, both sides of the warring factions. And now, at this juncture, if we take sides, that means we are jumping into the arena of Cold War again. And once we do it, there will be no end to it. And secondly, if we take sides, say if we take Russian sides, then the welfare and security of our 14,000 plus Indian students is jeopardized. If we don't take Russia side, if we take NATO side or Ukrainian side, again the same thing is there, same danger is there. So my take is that we should remain neutral. We should keep on saying that please go to negotiating table and discuss and find a solution through peaceful or diplomatic means. Again, the second thing is that many people in India are asking why India, with its big stature in world politics and all that, why India is not now India's capital, why is it not intervening, why is it not taking the role of mediator. Now, for the mediation, both parties should agree. While Ukraine has 2-3 times asked that India should mediate, Russia has not returned even a single word. And again, even if we mediate, I'm afraid that is going to boomerang against our Kashmir policy, because in Kashmir we had been consistent that despite Trump or despite some other world leaders trying to mediate, we had a stand that this is a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan, and we do not want any third party to come and mediate. So this stand, certainly we won't like this to come on, to be thrown on our face if we take sides. And even now, there is no problem being neutral. So because being neutral,
there's no problem in staying neutral.
Yeah, non-committal.
Okay, Maruf, but then the question still remains. Okay, the question still remains the same. For how long? Because, of course, there is going to be a lot of pressure. Like most of, the guests on the panel believe that we should not really have too many hopes from the meeting that's happening between Russia and Ukraine as we speak. Because, in November, when the prices of oil, crude, were skyrocketing and there were efforts by countries to somehow bring prices down because OPEC was not really, ready to adjust. At that time, US administration decided that let's dip into our strategic petroleum reserves. Of course, US has got more reserves than India, but then India also joined hands. There was also this kind of a statement coming from China, Japan, Republic of Korea, United Kingdom, etc. So now the way West and countries in Europe have come together, are announcing sanctions against Russia, won't there be pressure on India too?
No, I think that's an important question. I want you to respond to that. You see, for me, there are 3 elements. The one is about the state of the global economy post-pandemic and how this particular conflict is going to make things worse for all of us trying to bounce back. Now, whichever side we are on, inflation will happen, oil prices will remain high because they are linked to global security and stability. So the threat and stress premium is what oil exporters add to it. And we are now paying about 25 to 30% more than what we had calculated oil prices to be based on the budgetary announcements by the finance minister. Either way, the prices are going to hit us. It doesn't mean that if you go to the US camp, you're not going to pay high prices, because our pricing of oil and gas is linked to global markets, not to reserves that the government can pool in. We have enough financial reserves to be able to buy it, but doesn't mean prices are going to come down because we can buy it. The second thing is that you see essentially why India is neutral is indirectly conveying to the world it's a European problem. So you guys sort it out in Europe. Don't ask us to come in as dalals. Because at the end of the day, when we had a standoff with China, find me one Western country that openly admonished China. Nobody came in. Everyone gave you all sorts of roundabout statements that, we want no further escalation and all that stuff. Or for that matter, the US that wants us to take a stand now. It has taken, even now, the Biden administration, despite the humiliation in Afghanistan, despite the open theft that Pakistan has done over the years by taking in money from them and not giving them accountability, they have continued to have a blind spot with Pakistan. We need them to put them on the dock. Just the Indian government cannot take Pakistan to the cleaners. We've tried everything possible. And all this nonsense about FATF and all that, it's reached a dead end. So quite frankly, if you can't take on China, at least discipline Pakistan or put the fear of God in them so that we can then handle China. And finally, and most importantly, China. Now, China, all the sanctions they are announcing, they're not going to impact on China. You see, the sanctions are only limited to Putin. And that's a problem with sanctions historically. Unless it is sweeping, all-encompassing to a troublemaker and his friends, sanctions don't work. Everyone has to come on board consistently with a whole lot of measures, taking the checklist in their hand. If they don't do it, Russia will get by because they found alternate financial systems. They found alternate to trading. And so therefore, I believe that the conflict can only find a way if Ukraine is not prodded on to keep fighting, and they will fight, and they're good, tough fighters. But if they keep fighting, this thing will prolong. If it prolongs, the other two things come into play. Global price rise and the tension on India, which side are you going to be on? So until that happens, let us see. I predict early parts of this week, we will be discussing this 3 days down the line, because the situation will continue and perhaps get even worse unless Ukraine decides to back off a bit. Russia is not going to pull out from what it has occupied. I can give a guarantee on that.
Okay, unless Ukraine decides to back off. Dr. Harrison, now we are being told that Ukraine is pushing for some kind of a ceasefire and asking that Russian troops should leave Ukraine, which most believe, and as Varuf also had mentioned earlier, probably is not going to happen. But we are getting reports that, Putin is looking for some kind of an agreement. Do you think if now also Putin gets an agreement in hand that Ukraine will not be allowed to join NATO, perhaps things may start getting better? Or you think that option is now over?
Well, I think that's certainly one of the things, at the very minimum, that Putin wants. I think there was never really any real move to get the Ukraine into NATO anyway. So it seems rather odd that the timing of this whole situation. But I don't think that there will be any formal public commitment. Putin will want that, but Ukraine isn't going to give that because they'll be seen as doing it under pressure. Perhaps if Russia would withdraw, you might be able to get some sort of talks for a wider new security architecture that would allow for the Ukraine to sort of make the appearance, at least, of attempting to join either the EU or NATO, but the reality would be that it would never happen. So that Russia would get sort of what it wants, the Ukraine would get sort of what it wants, and the West would be able to say, and NATO and the EU, that we didn't sell out an independent nation. One of the things that Putin has managed to accomplish in a very short period of time is the actual move in Western Europe particularly with you've seen the results from Finland and Sweden, of much more public support for joining NATO. So this hasn't really helped Putin to divide the Western international community. I don't think the overall community is divided over this. It's right now just plotting on exactly what it can do as a practical matter. And just one additional note to go back briefly to the energy question. What I think is very interesting is we are also in a position where you have the JCOPA negotiations that are going on, and they seem to have been getting closer. If this crisis continues for an extended period of time, and I think we would all agree it probably will, the impetus then becomes, and where do you get more oil supply and energy supplies? One of those places, sanctioned Iran. So there is a potential breakthrough here that this crisis may have opened up an opportunity to be able to sort of reorient that discussion as well.
Yeah.
You know, as we speak, Dr. Harrison, we are also getting live inputs from the emergency special session of UN General Assembly, and Russian ambassador to the United Nations has said, and I quote, action plans were being made by Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO. The policy of US was to create anti-Russia Ukraine and ensure that it joined NATO. Ukraine joining NATO is a red line, compels us to adopt measures in response, has placed us at the verge of this conflict, unquote. You know, that's the reason why I asked you that question, that even if now Russia gets some kind of an assurance or a written agreement that, you know, it won't, Ukraine will not become a part of NATO, US is not going to rally behind Ukraine, won't allow it to be a part of NATO. Do you think it can put an end to the current conflict, or at least pause it for some time?
Well, I'm not entirely sure what the Russians would consider a guarantee. It won't be a treaty. It would be a political agreement that can be ignored by the next administration or next NATO General Secretary. So the reality is Russia will need something more than just a political commitment. There won't be any treaty. So the only way Russia can guarantee that the Ukraine will never enter NATO, EU, or any other sort of combination of that would be some sort of permanent military presence in the Ukraine. So I think any sort of political agreement right now, at least in the foreseeable future, is a non-starter. Russia is going to want to remain in physical control of the country to make sure its political and security objectives, as illegitimate or legitimate as they may be, is being met.
Okay, Maruf wanted to come in on that point. Yes, Maruf.
Yeah, I don't want to confront your guest, but I want to respond to some of the important issues that you've raised. You see, the first thing to understand is that an eminent US-based political scientist, the Americans all know him, his name is John Mearsheimer, has gone on record to say that the problem in Ukraine is largely a creation of America and the West. And it didn't happen yesterday. It's been happening over a period of time for three reasons. One is that America has been obsessed with regime change and putting in regimes which will all drumbeat for Western democracy. This is something that Putin and many others have been averse to. We saw signs of that in Georgia. We saw signs of that some other parts of the world also, and Middle East particularly. And this creates battle lines and creates divides for confrontation. The second thing is that in the case of Ukraine, when the Cold War ended, Ukraine was sitting on a decent pile of nuclear weapons. If it had it today, Russia wouldn't have rolled in the way they have rolled in. But they were given security guarantees by the West, America included, and they were given even a promise by Russia that you surrender your nuclear weapons, you dismantle your stuff, and we'll ensure that your territory will be safe. Both have abandoned Ukraine. Third, and this is equally important, is that in the case of Ukraine, there has been a situation that we saw it coming for some time. But even then, whether it was the promise of joining NATO or not, even then the situation could have been prevented. I'm giving you a hypothetical situation. People say it will take 2 decades for them to join Ukraine. Why is it taking to join the NATO? Why is it taking Ukraine so long? Why is it taking Ukraine so long when Estonia, Lithuania, and so many others became part of NATO? If Ukraine was a part of NATO, Ukraine today would have thumbed its nose on Putin, because Putin's fear was that if Ukraine comes under NATO, then my invasion of Crimea will have to be confronted with Ukraine. He doesn't want to expand the conflict further and further ahead, because then his resources will be stretched.
Okay.
So I think his aims are limited, and also, and equally important, is to understand that what is this going to lead to eventually. I've been harping on this all day. Give it a thought. Look at a map of Ukraine. There's a broad river that runs through Ukraine called the Dnieper River, and it divides Ukraine into 60-40 in a way that the population that is on the west, which is 60% or 70%, is leaning towards EU. And the population on the east, at least on the furthest parts of Ukraine, leans towards Russia. Russia has been paying their salaries, Russia has been arming them, etc., now recognize them also. So I think a settlement possibly between that river either side would be either autonomous territory or whatever else, would be the minimum that Russia will settle for, failing which we are looking at a long drawn out conflict. And Russia knows that long drawn out conflicts become expensive on Russia. This is what the West wants. This is what Russia doesn't want. So we'll have to see how quickly Russia achieves
Ambassador
what it wants
Tripathi, I want to give you the last word. I just have 30 seconds left on the debate.
I think what happened is, it is all caused by NATO's false promises given to Russia not to expand NATO's boundary eastward. One, which NATO did not keep. The second is that now the situation is now that the situation stands very worrying. Russia's last demand, last and probably the only demand, that Zelensky should resign. That I think that would be something which is, if it is accepted, because now martial law has been
of course,
declared.
all eyes are going to be on what happens in the meeting. I'm completely out of time, but thank you very much, gentlemen, all of you, for joining us here on Urban Debate on Mirror Now. Heading into a short break. On the other side of this break, we'll tell you the possible impact of this crisis on crude oil. Stay with us.